The revolution is lit.
Hello, comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akilia Naid, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. And today's study is highly important, so we encourage you right now to invite your friends and family to it. Last weekend, our party conducted our second 7th Congress Plenary, which was a historical turning point. Chairman Omali Yeshitela presented his groundbreaking political report, which he is going to be reading to you over the next couple of weeks. This week, the chairman reads from this report titled African Workers of the World, Unite and Organize, starting on chapter 1. For the first hour, the chairman will review the study materials, and in the second hour, we'll open it up for you, our live viewers, to ask your questions. It's my honor now to introduce our leadership, the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru, Chairman.
Good comrade. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'd like to just say that we are going over this political report again. We did it, as was mentioned earlier by Comrade Director Akilia Naid, during our critically significant historical, if I might say, second plenary to our 7th Party Congress. We had that plenary last weekend, and we went through this political report then. But the political report is something that sums up our work coming from our 7th Congress, which happened in 2018. And we will continue with this discussion around the political report, because it also anticipates the work that we will be doing now. It says a lot about what we have accomplished between the 7th Congress, then our first plenary of the 7th Congress, and now this, as has been mentioned, is our second plenary of our 7th Congress. And it's real important for us because we are part of the working class. And the parties of the ruling class, or the party of the ruling class in this country, that comes in two phases. These parties, generally speaking, never really share with any kind of depth the policies, the politic, the theory that influence what it is that they do. They simply show up, and they expect that the masses of our people, and the people having no alternative but to their worldview and to what it is they have put in motion, will simply go along. We cannot have a movement, or we don't want a movement with such a shallow understanding, that we engage in ongoing struggle to help this African working class that must become the ruling class after the defeat of colonial capitalism, that must begin constructing our own political power, our own political capacity, our own capacity to govern right now. We need a well-informed mass of African working people. And this is what the responsibility of the party is. Our party, which is, and makes no bones about the fact, we are the party of a particular class, working people, the working class, the African working class, whose labor and resources have gone to create this system that we are oppressed by, and a system that must be destroyed if there's ever going to be freedom. And not only must this system be destroyed, it must be destroyed under the leadership of the working class, who in the process of doing that and subsequent to its destruction must become the ruling class. That's our objective. It's not to get police cameras or to make America treat us better. You hear such trite. And those of you who've been watching this contrived performance on television revolving around the trial of Donald Trump and the so-called acquittal of Donald Trump, who are really familiar with what trials are in this country and in the world, that usually are used against the working people, the working class ourselves. There's nothing like that has transpired. There are no charges against this president, nor could there be for what he has done to African people in this country. There's no charges. There's no question of impeaching Trump or any other president for the terror that's imposed on our communities by government forces called police, by colonialism itself, the starvation, the poverty, the ongoing unrelenting assault on our dignity. None of that has ever been on any agenda, any docket for trial. So this thing that they're calling a trial represents more than anything a contest, a struggle between sectors of the ruling class, who and the outcome cannot be a trial for what America has done to us as a people. Trial for what America is doing to people in Yemen and South America and Africa and what have you. It cannot be that, because that is a trial against imperialism. And that's what we are about. In fact, in 1982, as long ago as 1982, our party did hold a trial on the US government itself, the first World Tribunal on Reparations for African people in the United States put the US government on trial. That is not something that has just transpired. And so you hear, sometimes really sadly and pathetically, even Africans on Black news channels and Africans who are dragged out now before the cameras as political pundits describing what's happening in the United States at this moment, this incredible crisis that the United States is going through. They talk about how, our nation now, must come together like never before, and that this is what we're about, that Trump somehow is responsible for splitting our nation and pitting this group against that group, when the fact is that we got this group and that group because one group came to this land that we now refer to as the Americas. And that the name of it itself is an indictment against the system, because it is named for a white person, it is named for a European who came and took this land, stole this land, and from the indigenous people and those who survived the onslaught, who survived the first pandemic, which is the white colonizer himself, and then the subsequent pandemics, such as the assault on the people using biological warfare, like smallpox infested blankets, and even themselves who would show up and breathe on people, and people, the indigenous people died from that. The reality is that we have all of these so-called nations that must come together. Trump didn't do that. Trump was not responsible for capturing African people and bringing us here and constructing constitutions and laws and things like that that are guaranteed to maintain our subservient status that results even today. While we have supposedly very bright people who can become president and US president who have been selected by white power to do that, our presence in the United States as the African people solely as entertainers. We jump and dribble and run and sing and do poetry and things like this, and we are beloved when we do that. But when we do Malcolm and when we do Garvey, when we do Huey, when we do Black Panther Party, when we do revolution, that's despised, and we are on trial for that. So this thing that we're going through now is to really struggle to elevate the consciousness, to rescue the consciousness and understanding of the African working class from this false assumption, this worldview that has been imposed on us by our oppressors. So we're going to be looking at this, and I'm hoping that that the people we're talking to will patiently involve yourselves. I know that just from meetings we've had recently with party members, that some people, newly enthusiastically leaping into the work of the party, leaping into the struggle to understand exactly what it is, all the nuances of African internationalism. And I know that some of you, and I've heard you say this, just sometimes have some problems with the language and things like that, but don't worry about it, you'll get it. If you got African people who with second grade education and sometimes less than that, who can remember all the books and read all the books of the Christian Bible and even the Quran, with names which, generally speaking, especially within the United States and other of these imperialist countries, are totally unfamiliar. And we learn it and we get it down because there's an assumption that knowing this stuff will help to certainly secure a place for us after life. What we're saying now is that we have a responsibility we can struggle with these issues. We've been pushed out of the educational process. We've learned to hate education precisely because many of us have come to understand that what they're calling education is just a means of training us to be chocolate-colored white people. And the education is something that diminishes our sense of worth. So that's something that happens, and that's something that's created some opposition and to education. And I'm saying that this is our education. This is stuff that we need to know and we can know, and coming to understand these issues contributes to our ability to replace our oppressors and to assume responsibility for our own lives and become a new ruling class. After that long-winded kind of opening, I want to go ahead and begin now. As, excuse me, Comrade Akile has already noted, I'm going to start now with chapter 1, which is the opening and the overview. And our second plenary of the party's 7th Congress opens with an urgent call for African workers of the world to unite and organize. As 2021 begins, we find ourselves in a historic period that we have long ago predicted when imperialism is in its death throes and when crisis never lets up, rolling into every new iteration with greater severity. Literally, the hallowed halls of US imperialism and parasitic capitalism have been breached. A fatal flaw in the oppressor ruling class, a fatal flaw of the oppressor ruling class is the assumption that its security depends on its relationship with other contending or political rival state powers. The fact is that the death of colonial capitalism is being determined by the rise of anti-colonial revolution under the leadership of the African working class, galvanizing exploited, oppressed, and colonized peoples inside the US and around the world. In 2020, the contradictions of the colonial capitalist system literally exploded into the consciousness of the peoples of the US and the world on many fronts. But everything about the existence of our party has prepared us for this moment. It has been the ideological and political struggles of our party for nearly 50 years and today that are defining this new period in which anti-colonial revolution is again becoming the main trend in the world. Most nationalists, militants, and ersatz communists are scrambling to make sense of this, and bereft of revolutionary philosophy are inadvertently or even deliberately pushing forward with actions and explanations that at best call for a kinder, gentler system of oppression. Our party is simply on point and on course as planned. We are African internationalists. This speaks to our philosophy stemming from a scientific investigation and analysis of the rise of the most oppressive and exploitative social system that has ever existed in history from the standpoint of Africa, Africans, and the colonizing, toiling masses of the world. We do not proclaim our readiness for this moment based on some philosophical conclusions, however. African internationalism, the theory of our party, is a theory of practice. The nearly half century of continuous practice of our party has tested our theory and contributed to our advancement that will prove to be the death of colonial capitalism. The work of the African People's Socialist Party has been one of the factors undermining capitalist colonialist cohesion. We have made a major contribution to the destabilization of the system through concrete socialist decolonizing projects and campaigns. We are a part of the existential crisis of this system. Completing the Black Revolution of the 1960s has always been a declared intent of our party. The last year of party work and development since the 2020 plenary of our 7th Congress indicates that we are well on the way to achieving that end. The African People's Socialist Party has helped deepen the crisis of imperialism through our success in resurrecting the African Revolution from the crushing blows of imperialist counterinsurgency. For African people, COVID-19 is just another face of colonialism. Despite the impact of COVID-19, the colonial virus, which has also deepened the crisis of many aspects of global economic and political activity, the African People's Socialist Party continued to move forward. We were able to do this because we understood that the sense of powerlessness being experienced by African people in the face of the brutal health and economic blows is inherent in the colonial condition. Our party was founded with the mission to end that colonial condition and powerlessness. We were founded to achieve power, Black power, over our lives and future. No COVID virus was going to derail that struggle. Our political structures and global strategic thrust were in place to win power over colonialism, however it manifests itself. This allowed the party to initiate the People's War to fight the colonial virus. Last February, only weeks before the viral pandemic gained publicly recognized traction, our party's 2020 plenary had rolled out our push for full implementation of our regional strategy. We were preparing to build our anti-colonial structures in Africa and to fight against colonial capitalism through our structures in every region of the globe where the forcibly dispersed African nation lives under exploitative duress. We were carrying out our mandates from our party's 7th Congress and its political report, Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, where I wrote, and I'm quoting, "Our struggle against colonial capitalism must be rooted in the actual colonized territories that we occupy. This is the essence of dual and contending power. The victory of our party will come as a consequence of our success in transforming every colonized African community that's in the world into a conscious, active opponent of colonialism. We will take organization and ideological development to the heart of the African working class communities where the colonial contradictions are concentrated, unquote. For our party, it was unnecessary to stop what we were doing to take on a new so-called invisible enemy. The enemy was quite visible, the same colonial capitalism that our party has always fought. The tools for its defeat were elaborated on in our last plenary. In the vernacular of the military, we were locking and loading. Through the party's development and empowerment arm, we immediately initiated the successful People's War Campaign under the leadership of Comrade Aisha Fields, director of the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project, or APDEP. APDEP quickly mobilized and deployed African doctors and healthcare professionals to work with the party and the Uhuru movement cadre to deliver healthcare protocols and care to our people globally in South African townships, Europe, the US, and elsewhere. While colonial capitalist governments, especially the US, were questioning the need for face masks, our People's War was already searching for, distributing, and sometimes producing face masks. We went door to door, giving out information to our people with appropriate life-saving protocols that otherwise do not reach the African working class. Through social media pamphlets, the Burning Spear newspaper, and the radio station, Black Power 96.3 FM, our party was there for our people. When mass resistance erupted, our party was ready. When a fierce African working class-led resistance erupted after the May 25th police murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, we took the leadership in defining the mass struggle against US domestic colonialism. Our theory of African internationalism has been especially important and served us well during this period. Advanced revolutionary theory is a prerequisite for revolution. It provides the to what end to otherwise directionless, spontaneous, though sometimes heroic protests and uprisings. The specific colonial conditions of this particular period, coupled with our history of work and struggle, opened the door for millions of Africans and others here and around the world to clearly see the fact that colonialism, not racism, is the main contradiction faced by African people in the US and wherever we have been dispersed. For the first time since the 1960s, African workers want to fight for Black power, and our more than 50 on-the-ground institutions led by Comrade Deputy Chair Omali Yeshitela represent the party's leadership in showing how this is done concretely. And after decades of party work and leadership to make reparations a household word, it erupted as a mass demand as never before. Injecting science into the spontaneous actions of the people is how our party contributes to putting mass movements of the people on the road most likely to establish a revolutionary trajectory, a trajectory toward the capture of political power. This is our only hedge against the perennial attempt of those who would sell out the long-term interests of the people for complete liberation from colonial capitalism for a mess of pottage. This is how we defeat the interests of the petty bourgeois neo-colonial aspirants who arise at the expense of true freedom, the complete destruction of colonialism. The domestic military occupation force, commonly known as police, murdered George Floyd on African Liberation Day. Again, we were in place. Members of our Solidarity Front were active in Minneapolis where George Floyd was killed. It is true. But we had already organized in the streets of St. Louis, Ferguson, following the murder of Mike Brown 6 years early in 2014. Out of that struggle, we built the Black Power Blueprint, a lasting presence and important economic development project in North St. Louis that continues to grow in strength and relevance daily. This is not what I mean when I say we were in place, though. We were in place because we have never relinquished the fight against the foreign and alien domination of our people, known as colonialism. With our ongoing struggle to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s, We continue to fight the nonsensical so-called anti-racism politic that achieved dominant status in the wake of the defeat of our revolution. To overturn colonialism, it is necessary to achieve Black power. Ultimately, we must achieve Black state power. This is the defining critical question of our times. While his November 5th, 1831 trial and its guilty outcome spoke to the enslaved condition of Nat Turner, a not guilty verdict would not have made him less enslaved. The fact that even a colonial state legalizes itself is a determining factor in validating the legal existence of colonialism. This example exposed the ridiculous nature of an imperialist directed fight against racism. The struggle against colonialism is not debatable, it is scientific reality. The struggle against colonialism is the decisive democratic struggle for the African nation. Unlike the past period before the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, when the struggle for democracy was led by the African petty bourgeoisie, many of whom were both patriotic and reliant on liberal imperialism, the African People's Socialist Party, the Revolutionary Party of the Proletariat, must lead the whole African nation and world in bringing the struggle for democracy to a revolutionary conclusion. This is what we might find, this means that we might find some basic short-term cooperation with the patriotic or nationalist sector of the African petty bourgeoisie. We are, however, contemptuous of any effort by the African petty bourgeoisie to steer our movement to accommodation with colonialism under slogans rallying Africans to fight against racism, whether disguised as a Black Lives Matter movement or some other innocuous claptrap, ultimately intended to improve the colonial capitalist system and our status as colonial capitalist slaves. We have always fought for power in our own hands. This is why we were in place. We were fighting for power over our lives in a process that elevates the African working class to the status of ruling class in a post-colonial world. This is why we are busy building and strengthening working class organizations throughout the world. This is why we have the regional structures and leaders, why we build self-determining economic development as opposed to relying on the goodwill of the colonial government. The colonial capitalist world economy already experiencing fundamental reconfiguration, shuddered under the added weight of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the wake of the US-initiated trade war of China, the rise of Russia from the presumed depths of economic and political irrelevance, and the unrelenting global efforts of colonized peoples to wrest control of our resources for our own benefit, the US was brought down from its lofty perch as preening, uncontested global hegemon of an uncontested global colonial capitalist system. Our party is the only force in the world consciously contesting the global colonial capitalist system instead of some disadvantageous colonial capitalist policy decision. So far, the colonial virus has destroyed 40% or more of African businesses within the US. Even the colonizers' businesses and sometimes large corporations are collapsing. Our enterprises did very well though. In fact, under the leadership of the Office of the Deputy Chair, our existing economic development projects blossom as called for by the mandates from our 2020 plenary. We are moving forward with even more ambitious economic projects similar to those of the Marcus Garvey movement 100 years ago. In St. Louis, our Black Power Blueprint economic program has uplifted morale and created economic possibilities for the African working class and others. Unlike any other in the world right now, we have property and projects on 5 contiguous blocks and on West Florissant Avenue and beginning up College Avenue. This includes the Uhuru House and the Gary Brooks Community Garden and event space with the majestic 25-foot African flag flying over the neighborhood from a 50-foot flagpole. This is where the One Africa, One Nation outdoor marketplace will launch this spring. Our territory covers 2 adjacent wards within which we are running candidates for St. Louis aldermen on platforms of reparations and power in the hands of the African working class. 4 miles away in the Wells Goodfellow neighborhood, we have our largest project yet, our GCO kitchen, which will house the national headquarters of our 40-year-old Uhuru Foods and Pies and the African Independence Workforce Program. We solved the problems left over from the Black Revolution of the 60s. This plenary helps us to expose the ubiquitous presence of our party. We recognize that the party must lead everything if the conclusion of all the efforts of our people going back to our first encounter with colonial capitalism up to now are to result in our liberation. It is our responsibility to define what liberation is and to lead our nation and class towards conquest. Up to now, there are many who have encountered the party without even recognizing the party's influence on how so-called Black struggle is understood and articulated. Not only did we introduce reparations to the world as a mass issue and introduce scientific revolutionary theory as a precondition for the actual liberation of our people, but we have long been in the face of the people in countless guises over the decades. We have been visible in an assortment of campaigns on many fronts, and those who were not armed with the tactics and strategy for revolution that we provided would not necessarily have recognized them as part of a single revolutionary process or project. We have already landed devastating blows on all assumptions of left colonial leadership of our struggle and the notion of workers and peoples in general that did not recognize the centrality of the colonial question. We have scientifically exposed the obscure Marxist concept of primitive accumulation and raised it to the essential question. We've proven that the emergence and sustainability of capitalism came from the assault on Africa, and that colonialism and all its violence and oppression was the midwife of capitalism. The continued work of our party has increasingly proven the leading theoretical role of African internationalism. The revolutionary presence of African internationalism and our party in the question of women's liberation is there in the material existence of the African National Women's Organization and the leading role of women in our party overall. The mystery of economic development for our people is being overcome by the concrete material evidence provided by the party through the myriad of anti-colonial economic institutions we have created, the Black Power Blueprint being only one of them. It is the influence of the party that is manifest in the leadership and organization of professionally trained and skilled Africans bringing clean water, agricultural training, and production through the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project. When we organize hundreds from the colonizer nation to fight the ruling class for reparations and the destruction of the power of the colonizer, it is an example of the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party in the form of the African People's Solidarity Committee and Uhuru Solidarity Movement. This and all the work of our party since our World Tribunal for reparations for African people in the US that was conducted in 1982 and annually for more than a decade throughout the US revealed that our party's leadership around reparations does not reduce the party into a single issue reparations movement organization. For our party, the struggle for reparations has always been a function of the party-led African Revolution. We are globally omnipresent. We are the African People's Socialist Party, Bahamas, Bermuda, Guadeloupe, or APSP, United Kingdom, France, or Occupied Tanzania, South Africa, Mali, Ivory Coast, etc. Most African workers are able to understand that the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement that is bringing African people back into political life in South Africa or North St. Louis, USA, is a material expression of their party that is capable of waging our struggle on many fronts, using every form of struggle at the same time. Our party is responsible for the African Revolution being put on a common trajectory necessary for our victory over an omnipresent colonial capitalist social system that has a stranglehold on virtually every aspect of our lives everywhere on earth. Moving forward from this second plenary of the 7th Congress, more of the African nation and working class will be able to recognize the coherence of the African Revolution and the struggle for the defeat of colonial capitalism that is provided by our party. We have
initiated a comprehensive, multifaceted approach to our national liberation and the emancipation of African workers and the toilers of the world. We are the advanced detachment, the general staff of the African working class. On a daily basis, we are cutting an ideological and political swath through a morass of opportunism of every kind, in words and in actions. This is how we contribute to the deep crisis of the hated global colonial capitalist system. We are holding fast to the mandates and resolutions of our 7th Congress, of our first plenary of our 7th Congress, and African internationalist tactics and strategies. Our call on African workers of the world to unite and organize expresses our recognition of the existential crisis of colonial capitalism and the role of our party in providing leadership and direction to the struggle for African liberation, unification, and socialism. We look at chapter 2. We're looking at how the crisis of imperialism deepens. And, you know, we keep talking about the crisis of imperialism. It's really important for us to understand that we are struggling against colonialism. And colonialism is not nice. There is no such thing as a good colonialism, a kind colonialism. And I'm saying this because there's some people were confused, not us, not people of our party and movement, but were confused by what is this contest that we spoke of earlier between a sector of the ruling class in the form of Republicans and Donald Trump in a fight against another sector of the ruling class, as represented by this man Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It's the same ruling class. It's the same colonial state, and who have severe differences that are being exacerbated every day because the success of the struggle of the oppressed peoples taking back our resources and making it more difficult for the colonial capitalists to get those resources, and creating friction between different sectors of the ruling class because they are contending for the same kind of resources. That's what we're looking at. But those are our resources that the Bidenettes and the Trumpettes are contending for. Those are our resources being fought for by liberals and conservatives in France and in England and all those other places. Those are our resources that's been fought for. And they put in place this structure internationally that we know as neo-colonialism, where the governments that they have created in France, in Africa, are usually, not usually, but in almost every instance, governments that represent not our people, but represent some imperialist force from Europe or from North America. And increasingly, of course, as we know, China is a major contender in this struggle and in controlling who is going to get what resources from our Africa. But it's our Africa. It's our labor, it's our resources. And that's true in Africa, that's true in the United States, that's true everywhere we are located. Those are our resources, and they are fighting among themselves over who is going to have control or absolute or more control. And our responsibility is to lead the people so that the people don't make the mistake of finding a solution in one set of colonizers versus another set of colonizers. And African internationalism helps us to define our own trajectory and to say, this is what it's going to take for us to be free. And that our relationship to any other force in the world is dependent upon how those forces reflect what we have already predetermined to be the interests of the African people, the African nation, under the leadership of the African working class. So nearly 40 years ago, this is on page 10, nearly 40 years ago at the party's first Congress in Oakland, California in September 1981, our main resolution or political report addressed the crisis of imperialism as it looked at the time. What is striking is that it could almost have been written for this political report to our second plenary of the 7th Congress. It sets the tone for our summation of this period. It lays out quantitatively how crisis after crisis compounds toward the point of no return, becoming qualitative transformation, the point where the uneasy equilibrium turns into destruction of colonial capitalism and the victory of the colonized nations and toiling masses of the world. So here's what we wrote of the world situation 4 decades ago, 40 years ago, and I'm quoting: "The essential victories of the peoples over imperialism, along with the almost daily emergence of new struggles against world imperialism, are creating shock waves and crises within the imperialist centers. The revolutionary triumphs of the people of Vietnam, Cambodia, Cuba, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Iran, Ethiopia, Grenada, and Nicaragua, to name a few, have caused absolute panic within imperialist circles. The fierce struggles of the peoples of El Salvador, Guatemala, Chile, Colombia, and Palestine, along with the deepening revolutionary process in Iran, have pushed imperialism to reveal a more reactionary face. The present epoch of struggle is threatening imperialism with a finality it has never faced before. The previous successful struggles against imperialism, combined with those presently occurring and incessantly emerging, are removing from imperialism's bloody grasp the near-free human and material resources which were previously extracted from the oppressed peoples with impunity. This situation has led to a shortage of some material resources, price adjustments for others, and has contributed to imperialism's urgent scramble to place a death grip on those who remain under imperialist control within the world capitalist system. Consequently, the imperialist centers are experiencing a contraction of production and escalating inflation and unemployment, which contribute to increasing political and social contradictions within the imperialist centers themselves. The shrinking resources available for theft by the imperialist powers collectively, plus the struggle by US imperialism to maintain its supremacy over world capitalism, is leading to intra-imperialist struggles as the various imperialist powers continuously belie the adage of honor among thieves by attempting to cut the throats of their imperialist competitors whenever it is to their individual advantage to do so. Consequently, although the NATO allies are keeping up a good public front, it is clear that the unity of the NATO alliance is being constantly challenged by the resistance of most members to US pressures to contribute more to their own domestic inflationary pressures by spending more for arms and war preparations. The European alliance partners also have differences among themselves concerning the US belligerent and provocative anti-Soviet posture. And the US is forever threatening all-out war with Japan, which has been more successful in exploiting US auto and electronics markets than some US domestic capitalists. In Europe, inflation, unemployment, and various political contradictions are leading to ever widening social contradictions. There has already been a US NATO-inspired coup in Turkey, where thousands of progressive political activists have been rounded up by the military, and reports of torture and mistreatment of political prisoners abound. A similar attempted coup in Spain was only narrowly averted, and the fascist generals are obviously lurking in the background, becoming more organized and awaiting their next opportunity, unquote. That's the end of that quote. And this passage from the political report to the party's first Congress 40 years ago clearly reveals that this passage from the political report to the party's first Congress 40 years ago clearly reveals the fact that imperialist crises are unrelenting, one following the other. Each apparent imperialist success in quelling the struggles of Africans and the world's peoples is eventually sometimes rapidly overturned, revealing an even deeper rupture in the colonial capitalist social system than what was previously obvious. We've continued to talk about the crisis of imperialism because crisis is built into a system whose permanence and success rely on the domination of the colonized peoples of the world. Africans everywhere are fighting to determine our own future and way of life without the unwelcome intervention of crass, craven, foreign and alien colonists. African people are determined to live without the unwelcome intervention of colonialism and its spawn, capitalism. A global system founded and reliant on colonialism is inherently unstable and crisis prone due to the resistance of the colonized. This colonialism is the original sin of capitalism. It is what Karl Marx characterized as the primitive accumulation of capital, the slavery pure and simple in the New World that provided the pedestal upon which rests capitalism or wage slavery in Europe. Some Marxists speak often of the crisis of imperialism. However, they mean something entirely different from our party. In the African People's Socialist Party, we understand and teach that all capitalist activity occurs on a pedestal of the colonial domination of peoples and countries globally, and that the colonial enslavement and dispersal of Africans is key to this activity. African internationalism teaches us that capitalist or imperialist crises are not simply a matter of capitalist overproduction atop the colonial pedestal. It is the existence of the inherently unstable pedestal that foments crisis. It is the growing inability of the colonial capitalists to benefit from their parasitic station in the same old way, either because of the growing active political consciousness of those who constitute the colonial pedestal or escalation of struggle between contending predators for its control. So even ruling class pundits declare the US in permanent decline. In any event, we are not the only ones to recognize imperialist crisis. The crisis of imperialism and the decline of white power has taken center stage in the discourse of leading thinking representatives of the ruling class. The July-August 2020 edition of the Bourgeois Journal, Foreign Affairs, is dedicated to this discussion. One joint submission by Alexander Cooley and Daniel H. Nexon has the revealing title, How Hegemony Ends, the Unraveling of American Power. The article acknowledges that there have been many other predictions of the end of the system, but this one is different, the article states, as it goes on to describe the symptoms of imperialist decline as it is concentrated in US white power. Say Cooley and Nexon, and we're quoting him from the Foreign Affairs Journal. But this time really is different. The very forces that made US hegemony so durable before are today driving its dissolution. Three developments enable the post-Cold War US-led order. First, with the defeat of communism, the United States faced no major global ideological project that could rival its own. Second, with the disintegration of the Soviet Union and its accompanying infrastructure of institutions and partnerships, weaker states lacked significant alternatives to the United States and its Western allies when it came to securing military, economic, and political support. And third, transnational activists and movements were spreading liberal values and norms that bolstered the liberal order. Today, those same dynamics have turned against the United States. A vicious cycle that erodes US power has replaced the virtuous cycles that once reinforced it. With the rise of great powers such as China and Russia, autocratic and illiberal projects rival the US-led liberal international system. Developing countries and even many developed ones can seek alternative patrons rather than remain dependent on Western largesse and support. And illiberal, often right-wing transnational networks are pressing against the norms and pieties of the liberal international order that once seemed so implacable. In short, US global leadership is not simply in retreat, it is unraveling. And the decline is not cyclical, but permanent, unquote. Yeah, the white man said it. The authors of this Foreign Affairs submission, however, could not possibly envision the end of the colonial capitalist system altogether, or that the lowly despised colonized would bring about its end. They would also be contemptuous of the idea that African internationalism is the major global ideological project that they spoke of, effectively contending with the whole system, including the neo-colonial weaker states, which are themselves remnants of the past order the authors recognize as representatives of US decline. Globally, many have witnessed the drama associated within the 2020 US presidential election with amusement or bemusement. However, party members are armed with the science of African internationalism and organization constantly using principles of historical materialist investigation and analysis have not been confused at all. The contradictions of a failed global system are concentrated in the US. The disabled hegemon, US disabilities, are representative of a terminally afflicted colonial capitalist world social system. For years now, actually since the party's first Congress and continuing on through each subsequent Congress, we have been defining and quantifying the crisis of the existing world system that was founded and is reliant on a violent parasitic stranglehold on Africa, our people, and the colonized and subject peoples of the world. The shocking election of Donald J. Trump as US president in 2016 was evidence of political crisis grown so severe that it could no longer be obscured. The political fissures within US colonial-based society were bared. To the dismay of white colonial rulers, the 2016 presidential campaign process and election allowed white people, ordinary colonizers, to discover their common disunity with the colonial capitalist political establishment. They learned that the colonial capitalist media and other institutions were lying when they claimed their ruling class narrative mirrored white people's understanding of the world and their own view of themselves. This discovery is what has given such weight to Trump's characterization of the bourgeois media as fake news that has become part of the general lexicon used often by bourgeois media themselves. The system has always been rigged against anyone who challenged the leading ruling class bloc. Many colonial political pundits considered Trump's 2016 election a fluke. His campaign disregarded the colonial bourgeois machinery and rules that have always regulated presidential elections and vetted so-called responsible and respectable candidates. Trump won despite the fact that he actually did confront a rigged system, and it is rigged. It has always been rigged, and not just against Trump, but against any potential for an effectively run and unscripted campaign that was disruptive to the general interests of the leading ruling colonial capitalist bloc. It was rigged with the prescient US ruling class 1787 Constitutional Convention. This compromise that apportioned representatives to the Congressional House of Representatives and electoral votes according to a formula that would only count each African in the US as 3/5 of a person. This handful of bourgeois selected electoral voters superseded the popular will of the people. It was built that way. The Southern colonial capitalist slaveholders were ensured an advantage, but one which colonial capitalist rulers of the North could live with. This was rigged by contending bourgeois interests, all of which would be realized at the expense of the colonially enslaved Africa. US elections, like all other colonial capitalist democratic elections, are nonviolent contests between contending sectors of the ruling class for control of the state. A mutual distrust among them sometimes makes it difficult for someone directly from the ruling class to succeed in capturing the US presidency. Others of the ruling class have often united to prevent an individual colonialist like Nelson Rockefeller, for example, for assuming personal control of the US imperialist state apparatus. The rulers generally campaign and run by proxy, utilizing their electoral machinery, including the ruling political parties, to collectivize and regulate the process through which they contend for control of the state. They fund the persons and parties most likely to carry out their agenda, and even supply their campaigns and cabinets with lawyer functionaries, lobbyists, bourgeois intellectuals, and other thinking representatives. The leading capitalist bloc since the 1940s in the US and globally is what is often referred to as Atlanticist. This is the international bloc of Euro-American capitalists that came together following the Second Imperialist World War to institutionalize their collective colonial capitalist world domination. They created the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, United Nations, the UN, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank, and an assortment of trade and treaty organizations designed initially to frustrate Soviet Russia's development and influence, prevent Germany from arising anew as a separate contender for world domination, and keep the world's political economy from achieving a destabilizing anti-colonial radical departure. Trump was not vetted by the ruling Atlanticist bloc because he was initially considered more as comic relief than as a real candidate. He received free publicity from ruling class media that his opponents would belatedly spend millions of dollars to acquire. Trump was also not primarily dependent on ruling class dollars to fund his campaign to the extent of his 2016 opponents. And although it appears that he has far less money than he claims, he did have enough money to run an effective presidential campaign at a time of massive dissatisfaction among the people, colonized and colonizers alike. Trump was free of the direction and discipline by ruling class money and the lobbyists attached to it. He was not part of the Atlanticist deal. He was therefore forced to run his campaign and define his issues in opposition to the advice made available to other ruling class candidates. He was a reality show performer on his own. His obvious independence of the colonial ruling class and the fact that his was a candidacy that defined itself as against the so-called system brought refreshing relief for many of the white colonizer population grown weary of economic decline and uncertainty and the evident increasing loss of US imperialist prestige in the world. All these things that contributed to the inherent value of whiteness. Trump's "Make America Great Again" slogan was clear to Africans. It was "Make America White Again." Reverse the advance of Africans and the colonizers of the world. It was political reactionary intent on restoring imperialist, read white prestige by returning to total unambiguous colonial domination of the world. Bernie Sanders, flying under the banner of the ruling Democratic Party, was the other candidate that most ignited the passions of the white or colonizer population. He also tapped into the popular discontent that now roars the political terrain within the US. While openly opposed to reparations to colonized African people, Sanders' campaign recognized the decay of the economic status of ordinary colonizers. Healthcare, student loans, retirement pensions, education, the socially destabilizing wealth gap and income equality among white people, etc. Sometimes Bernie Sanders supporters are upset when we put Sanders in this category, but it's true. This is not because we don't like Bernie Sanders for some personal or subjective reason. It's because we live under colonial domination, and the whole system dominates us as a people. It's a foreign and alien power, and the system supports that domination of our people. And Bernie Sanders couldn't even support the timid calls for reparation that even some other Democratic Party contenders were able to support. But be that as it may, the fact is that Africans live under colonial domination, and the colonial system, the colonial capitalist system, can only work at the expense of the Africans, the Mexicans, the oppressed and exploited peoples around the world. It can't work otherwise. So if they're not joining the indigenous peoples, if they're not joining the African Revolution, if they're not supporting overturning this relationship, then they're trying to find their future and maintain some happiness on top of the colonized domination of the rest of the world. So it ain't because we don't like Bernie Sanders, because he's got a bad slogan or something to that effect. Or you can't say, can't put Bernie in that group because Bernie this or Bernie that. Bernie is a colonizer. He's white. He benefits from the colonial relationship that white people have imposed on the whole world. And so, and this is not race talk that I'm talking about, but in the sense that I'm not saying that he's white, therefore doomed to some position or some status based on what people refer to as the race. I'm saying that he's white and therefore a colonizer, and that even people who are colonizers can turn against colonialism and can join the movement being pursued by the colonized peoples of the world. But Bernie hasn't done that. Bernie has told white people in the same way Trump has told white people, follow me, and I will make it possible for you to enjoy the privileges of white people, like some people like to refer to as white privilege, was colonial privilege. The colonizers do have privilege. And so this is what Bernie Sanders has promoted. And this is why many of the people who say don't put Bernie in that camp, because they know that Bernie promises them that he's going to do something about their student loans. He's going to make it possible for them to get more money per hour. He's going to do some of these kinds of things that don't challenge the existence of imperialism or colonialism itself, but tries to find a more comfortable way to live within the colonialism. That's the same thing Trump is doing. Trump is saying that we can be better off, white people, by coming together and fighting against niggers and fighting against the rapists who are Mexicans and all these other people around the world and the whole countries around the world. This is how we're going to have a better life. This is what Trump is saying, make America great again, which is the same way of making America white again. Sanders comes from the same basic position, except he's saying that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is to place some greater taxes on the corporations, and these taxes can go to $15 an hour, can have education and free healthcare and that kind of thing for the white people. You know he's talking about the white people because he can't even say reparations to the African people in the same way even some of the other liberals within the Democratic Party were able to say that. So he's not fighting against the system, which is a white-dominated system. He's not fighting against that system. He's fighting for white people, just like Trump is fighting for white people, to have a better way inside this system. And this system cannot give a better way, either for the Trumpers or for the Sanders, without exploiting more the African and other peoples around the world to bring more resources here. So, however, despite the fact, we say, that so-called progressive Sanders is compelled to call himself a socialist, the parasitic nature of the capitalist system means that, like white Trump supporters, the aspirations of Sanders supporters could only be satisfied at the expense of Africans and the colonized workers of the world. Both Trump colonizers and Sanders colonizers could only regain their status and stature within the existing system through deepening the oppressive exploitation of the colonized of the world. One inferred difference is that in the minds of some, Africans might receive collateral benefit from the so-called progressive program Sanders' white colonial socialism promises to the colonizers. So I'm going to stop now and turn it back over to Comrade Director Akile Anai. And so perhaps we can even deepen this discussion and look at what other kinds of issues we may have. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Uhuru, yes, thank you so much for just opening up this political report to the whole world to study. And, you know, it was, of course, really powerful to be presented at the the party's plenary, and we're very, you know, just it's really incredible to be able to study it with you, especially over the next couple of weeks. So yes, we're going to go ahead and get into some questions and discussion. So if you do have some questions for the chairman regarding the political report, go ahead and type them into the chat. I want to acknowledge, before we take our first question, where people are viewing from. We have St. Petersburg, Florida, St. Louis, Missouri, Oakland, California, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, San Diego, California, Pinellas Park, Florida, Lakeland, Florida, Battle Creek, Michigan, Seattle, Washington, Columbia, Missouri, Kuwait, Richmond, Virginia, Trenton, New Jersey, Hempstead, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Huntsville, Alabama, Frankfurt, Germany, Ohio, Nanticoke, Pennsylvania, Delaware County, Pennsylvania, Jamaica, Newark, New Jersey, Tanzania, Deltona, Florida, Detroit, Michigan, Louisville, Kentucky, somewhere in the Dakotas, Occupied Azania, South Africa, Kenya, Branson, Missouri, Atlanta, Georgia, Houston, Texas, Dearborn, Michigan, Walkerville, Maryland, Jacksonville, Florida, and Sierra Leone. So that's where we have people tuning in right now. And let's go ahead and jump into our first question, which came from Comrade Nasir in Kuwait. He asked, question, for clarity, the chairman read colonialism is the original sin of capitalism, end quote. However, I thought it was the perspective of African internationalism that capitalism is the monetary system of colonialism, hence colonialism preceding capitalism, or am I missing something? That's there.
Colonialism does precede capitalism. When we say it's, I see what the point he's making. It says that it's the original sin of capitalism. But the point is that this is not a chicken and the egg kind of thing, which came first. The fact is that colonialism preceded. Colonialism gave birth to. It is the original sin that gave rise to capitalism. So I hear what Comrade Nasir is asking. And if there's a lack of clarity on my part, I want to just go ahead and restate our position is that capitalism was born of colonialism. That's where it came from. That's where the initial resources came from. And I guess I borrowed the concept of original sin from Karl Marx, who talked about how what he characterized as primitive accumulation being the original sin. This is where the capital that preceded the production, the accumulation of the capitalist production. It was started through turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where the whole resources came that gave birth to capitalism, and Marx used that term. I was opposed to the, I'm struggling with the term of primitive accumulation for the same reason that Nasir has just picked up on, that it presupposes history of African people being made for white people. It's the description of the world, of the white world in a way, and white progress that came about as a consequence of this innocuous term that they call primitive accumulation. So the thing of primitive accumulation is simply defining how the white world defined from the perspective of the colonizer or from the Europe. What we're saying is colonialism is real, and that it was an assault on Africa. Primitive accumulation doesn't actually define what happened to us. It defined what happened to white people as a consequence of what happened to us. What we're saying is colonialism happened to us, and capitalism is what happened to white people as the consequence of what happened to us. I hope I didn't confuse it any more than we started with that. So I mean, unity. Our position remains the same. Comrade Nasir. Uhuru.
Uhuru, and he asked another question, Chairman. He said, I'm struggling with understanding the connection the chairman is making when he says a colonial state legalizes itself, is the determining factor in validating the legal existence of colonialism. This example exposes the ridiculous nature of an imperialist directed fight against quote unquote racism. I'm missing the connection. I understand why the struggle against racism is a waste of time, but not seeing the connection between the comment, it legalizing itself.
I think that's a legitimate thing that Comrade Nasir is making. And I think even when I wrote that, I understood some what possible confusion there, but the state legalizes itself, period. So it's not a matter of that there's this place out there, some noble entity with the ability to define what is legal and what is not legal. The state legalizes itself. That's why I have struggled with some Africans who today we're talking about how in the Constitution there's this hidden message that somehow once you get this or find this document, et cetera, then we can find freedom. And I'm saying that the state legalizes itself. Whatever it defines as legal is what is legal. It is the capacity to oppress and guarantee its own rule. It writes the laws, and if it doesn't like the law, it changes the law. And if it doesn't like the law, and it modifies the law. But the state legalizes itself. So colonialism is made legal by the colonizer. It's not illegal or illegal because of something that we do until we overturn that state. Then we are the ones who decide what is legal and what is not legal. We are the ones in the process of even making this struggle. We began to set up these tribunals and things that put the state on trial. That's how we do that in every place we can. So we then become, the working class, the armed working class becomes the state. And so that's what I'm talking about in terms of how the state legalizes itself. It doesn't, there's no law book. You can't go to the law library and find a way to say, well, is US imperialism legal? Yes, it's legal. And that's why we can't make battles based on what's legal, because the state legalizes itself. So slavery was legal. And people say, well, it's immoral, except it was legal. And they made it. Who made it legal? The colonizers, the ones who held us in an enslaved state. So our objective, that's why I make the point that Nat Turner, even if Nat Turner had not been found guilty in 1831 when he was put on trial, if he had been found not guilty, he still would have been a slave. He still would have been living under colonial slavery. So the objective is not simply to find him not guilty, even though you make that struggle when you can, but you make that struggle in a way that advances our ability to overturn the ability of the colonizers to make that choice for us by destroying the state power they have and imposing our own free state by African people over our lives and in our relationship with the colonizer. I hope that wasn't, I hope I didn't add more confusion to the question, Comrade Nasir. If not, just keep on commenting.
Yes, thank you, Comrade Nasir. And he did respond that to the first question or first response that, that it was clear and added insight, Uhuru. So this next question kind of moves away from the political report, but comes from Comrade Marcus Louisan. And I know there's been some discussion about potentially doing this anyway, but he asked, have you watched Judas and the Black Messiah? And what are your thoughts on how Hollywood depicts our leaders? And of course, this is the movie, about Fred Hampton and the informant.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet. I'm going to, and because I'm compelled to. My issue, I can say already, without having seen it, and I also want to say that I know that Comrades Afua and Fred Hampton Jr. function as some kind of advisors or something to that effect on that. And I know that Akur and Fred Jr. Both, were really honest people, and they want to forward the struggle, and they want to make sure, their objective is to make sure that their husband and father was not misrepresented in the film. And so, but from my perspective, is whether he was misrepresented or not is, for me, not the fundamental question. The fundamental question for me is whether the murder of Fred Hampton was seen as part of an offensive that's made against the African Revolution globally, not just in Chicago, because that wasn't just about Chicago. They were killing us all over the country, in the United States, and they were killing us all over the world. Whether that you can infer that from the movie, and then whether or not, and that was a part, because I know they're gonna say some bad things, I've heard anyway, about J. Edgar Hoover, who was over the FBI at that time, but Hoover was over an institution of the United States government, part of the state that we were just talking about. Does the movie indicate that the murder of Fred Hampton and however William O'Neill participated contribute to just what they've done with closing our schools and the murder and mayhem that continues to happen in Chicago and our people right now? Is it just that a bad thing happened with Fred and that William O'Neill was the bad guy, though sympathetic, as I'm understanding that he's been put forward? Was he part of an apparatus, an entity that was designed to crush the revolutionary aspirations for happiness and the return of our resources that are being waged by African people elsewhere? Where? Because they can tell a story about how bad the government was, and they do this. There are museums that you can go to right now that show African people treated so badly, horribly, viciously, etc. But look at us now. In other words, that we went through all of that and we've come to this glorious place where it might be trouble, all the problems may not be solved, but it's much better than it was before, or this is what we've accomplished now. So the thing is that African people are enslaved, colonially enslaved. And part of us were this project of slavery and colonialism pushed us into Chicago from the southern part of the United States, where we were initially enslaved in this country. And that is part of what built the whole capitalist system. My only concern, and I'm going to watch it, and because I may be way off base. I mean, the movie may be wonderful, containing all of the elements that I'm asking for, but I'm tired of this thing. Right now, you see all kinds of movies being projected about African people. You know, they've got Sam Cooke and Jim Brown and Malcolm X, you know, and that movie, and they've got all kinds of stuff that's designed to hold us up right now. But the question is, do those movies reflect the trajectory that we've been on since our captivity to take back our total freedom as a people? And does what they do with that movie simply capture, is that a snapshot of that trajectory? Or is it just to maintain and control our understanding of reality, just based on essentially what happened with the murder, what happened with O'Neill? Does it make a statement about the essence of the whole system that was born from enslaving African people? Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. And again, that came from Marcus on Marcus Louison. Yeah.
Or Marcus.
All right. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Marcus. So our next question looks like it's going back to the political report now, comes from Michael T. It says a question and a comment. Great report and absolutely imperative for the international African working class and others to hear. Nevertheless, I find the characterization of Trump as an outlier, thus not still the clear and present ruling class danger problematic, considering one, the powerful capitalistic and imperialistic forces he openly allied with and placed in his cabinet, neoliberals included. And now, even out of power, his colonizer base is as powerful as any other colonizer base, as the recent impeachment acquittal shows.
Yeah, the thing is that, you know, in many ways, you ought to be happy about what Trump did, because the liberal imperialists, the left colonizers, and their left allies in what's supposed to be the revolutionary movement, only offered the Democratic Party or some variation of the party or its policies, as an alternative to Trump. But I mean, just about 2/3. The last thing I saw was 57% of the white people who voted for Trump. And this, you know, exposed what it is that we're living with. So you talk about the what was it? The characterization, the neoconservative, is that what we're talking about? And I mean, some of these guys were in Obama's cabinet. Some of them in Biden's cabinet. So I mean, yeah, they are there. And we've said that both parties, they permeate the entire system. But the point is that I'm making is that there is no fundamental difference between a what they call a conservative or even a fascist colonizer and a liberal colonizer. That we're still living under colonial domination. Our objective has to be to overturn this and not to be misdirected by the fact that some of them call us niggers while others just call us Mr. Nigger. The point is that the system itself is rotten, foul, and it doesn't matter if they're neoconservatives or neoliberals or anything to that question. There is still parasitic capitalism in the form of colonial domination of African people that we are in a contest with. And the Bidenettes, who can bring on a Kamala Harris, who can bring on, you know, like a woman, indigenous woman, put her over the Interior Department, who disguises or tries to obscure the fact that we're still living under colonial domination, and sometimes worse than we might otherwise be living. So that's what I'm talking about. So Michael T., the point is that we are colonizing. That's the fundamental question, fundamental point that I'm trying to make. And if in fact you can see a benevolent colonialism as opposed to a Trump type of colonialism, then your point, is well taken. But there is no benevolent colonialism, just like there's no benevolent slavery or something to that effect. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Michael T., for your question. So our next question, I did want to acknowledge, we have people listening from Rockford, Illinois. Connie Burton in Tampa, Florida is on, and Brooklyn, New York. Also, somebody just commented London. So just want to say a to those comrades. And our next question moves, I think, well, maybe not, moves from the political report. It comes from Comrade Langston in Boston, and he asks, do you see investments in the stock market as investing in colonial capitalism is using profits from investing for our own government? And then it says in line with DNC power. I'm not sure what that is, but that's the question. Is that clear enough?
Well, the stock market functions as an instrument of capitalist accumulation and what have you. So I'm not sure how to understand the question of where to go with it. Our objective is to overturn this whole foul social system. And the stock market, you can, the capitalists control the stock market. They are the stock market. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not quite sure how to understand the question or perhaps how to answer it. But our objective is to overturn the whole colonial capitalist system. All of the capitalist system, including the stock market, rests upon this foundation of the colonial terror that's waged against all the peoples of the world, including Africans. And it's the part of the capitalist colonial social system itself that has to be destroyed.
Uhuru. And Lanks, if you want to just, I don't know, expound or clarify the question a little bit more, maybe we could get a little bit more specific. But so that was the last of our questions, but I will read a couple comments, Chairman. We have one from Nasir. He says, this statement brought profound clarity to me. Quote, the crisis is built into a system whose permanence and success rely on the domination of colonized peoples of the world. It's as if a self-destruct button was built in it. That is profound clarity. Thank you, Chairman. We have Connie Burton, who says, because of my limited education, I appreciate the questioning for more clarity, making it plain. Uhuru.
Sister Connie, good to hear from you, as usual. And I don't know about that limited education, but if that's how you want to describe it, we'll work with it.
Uhuru. Comrade Abdullah in St. Louis said, good leadership is critical to the success of any organization. We cannot fail with the excellent leadership of our chairman. Vanguard up. Let's see. Yeah, so those are, I think, some of the comments. Comrade Nyabinga commented, and this was in reference to something you mentioned previously. He said, ain't enough feel sorry for a parasite to stop being a parasite, because that's how it survives. The host has to remove the parasite regardless of how the parasite feels about it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Can't say, well, I'm not going to get rid of this parasite sucking my life, our future, and everything away from us, because, it sure is pitiful parasite. No, a parasite has to die. There's no future for us unless that. And I think that's a good statement coming from Comrade Nyabinga. We talk often about how it's necessary. We sometimes, the oppressed, are least to recognize what our interests are as a people. And I've used the analogy of that would include, being friends even with an undertaker. You can have a friend who is an undertaker, but you have really seriously competing interests, because it's in the interest of the undertaker for you to die and for your family to die for your neighbors to die, because that's how the undertaker makes a living, and that's how the undertaker feeds his children and guarantees they will have education and stuff. So just because you pass by a conference or something like that, forum that featuring undertakers, and you hear one make a good speech, or even the one make a good speech, you don't say, "Wow, I love that speech. I think I want to die 3 years early so the undertaker can get the body." No, you have competing interests, and that's what's really important for us to understand, because African people get sold on this really kind of subjective understanding of the world, and so we get locked up on whether we like somebody, whether they're really nice people or something to that effect, as opposed to what are the interests that's involved here. And African people as a group, we do have particular interests. We have an interest in ending our subjugation by foreign and aliens. And that's true of most people around the world who live under subjugation of some form or another, either directly or indirectly, because imperialism controls most of the world. And those places where it is, and the thing that's making it ill today is more and more people say, not only am I not gonna die early for this guy, I'm gonna start taking vitamins and doing push-ups, stop smoking, and doing all those other kinds of things that might lead me to die early. This guy's gonna be in trouble because I'm doing everything I can to extend my life. And if I extend my life, then that has an impact on his life, because his life depends on my dying. His family's health and well-being depends on my dying. No matter how cute his baby is, that baby is fed because I die, my mama die, my neighbors die, and things like that. So this is terms of what we mean in terms of recognizing what your material interests are, so that whatever kind of emotions that might come into play are subordinated to what it is that we have to do as a people to experience freedom. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman, for just expounding on that point that was made by Comrade Binga. And I'm still looking for more questions. So if people have some, please type them into the, Comrade Langston clarified. He says, I think the chairman's response is clear. Basically, can we use profits from investing for our own efforts, or should we destroy it? Thank you.
Yeah, we can use profits for investing for our own efforts. We can use all those things, but we can't find ourselves relying on that, because what happens is that if that's your strategy, then you have what you've just done is create an interest in keeping that thing alive. So if that thing goes against your own existence, your own interest, then your objective is to get rid of it. If in fact you can find some way to infect it so that it's destroyed by participating, that's one thing. But the thing is that once you get into this place where I'm going to rely on what I can get from the capitalists to build my own thing, if you rely on that, if what you're doing in getting those resources from the capitalists doesn't contribute to destroying the capitalists, then you end up depending on the capitalists and the capitalist operation that we're describing. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. Let me see. Oh, someone named Remembering Africa, Africana on YouTube said, tell your undertaker friend you're going to allow a different funeral home to take me and see what happens to your relationship.
Yeah. That's part of what's happening, by the way, with some saying that they're going to a Chinese funeral home now here in Africa. And you see Chinese funeral homes under attack, by the US government. That's what's happening now, this whole thing against China. There's another funeral home that's over there in terms of its relationship to Africa and to, ourselves.
So, yeah, I'm not seeing any more.
Some more,
Chairman. Yeah.
Read some more.
Okay.
I'm on page 17. once the center of imperialism, the US is now exposed as the paper tiger. Today, the US colossus that has openly dominated the world as the preeminent imperialist power for more than 70 years since the end of the Second Imperialist World War is being exposed as the paper tiger Chinese revolutionaries once derided when China was a leading force in the struggle against colonial capitalist world hegemony. During these 7 decades, the US has functioned as the center of gravity for the imperialist center. It has been the defining political and economic power. Almost every capitalist country and its colonized dependent paid tribute to, and to the extent possible, model their economic and political systems on those of the US. This, along with evolving economic structures, is what is now often referred to as globalization. What is increasingly clear today is that the contradictions reflecting the deep crisis of this social system, this global social system of parasitism, are concentrated in the US and represent an unraveling of colonial white power that is growing in visibility with each passing day. And I say this, I mean, one of the things that I hope comrades find important about this, it is because as people have heard that Africans from various places around the world and others are participating in this discussion. And I just think that what's important about what we're doing now is we're breaking through those borders that the empire has imposed on us, locked us into this worldview, where most of us, our people, find ourselves trapped in the villages or the specific communities and cities, and sometimes you might see something broader in terms of the country where we live. And this political report hopefully helps to define the reality for all of us, wherever it is that we're living. We lay out a foundation for how you understand what's happening to us in Zimbabwe, what's happening to us in Haiti or Jamaica, what's happening to us in Kuwait and various other places around the world. Hopefully this is what happens with us, so that we don't have some kind of limited view that allows us to be mock Americans or mock Black Brits or something to that effect. We can see the whole world and see where we fit into it. We can perceive a destiny for ourselves. This is what a worldview is all about. And so that's part of the things part of what I hope the political report contributes to, because people in our party, for example, in Folkville, in South Africa, the township, or in North St. Louis, most of the African workers have never given too much thought of what was happening to us in all these other places. In fact, desperate, our situation is usually so desperate that the immediate thing is generally what it is that we are continuously trying to deal with and understand. But what we are doing is trying to help, and when I say trying to help, I'm not talking about in some kind of charitable way. I mean taking the politic to the masses of our people where we exist, so that the people can see in that specific problem that they have. In the jail uprisings in North, that just happened in St. Louis, where you got these pitiful so-called Black leaders, who are wishing for the well-being of the cops or the sheriff's deputies or jailers who got hurt when the slaves rose up. That we see in this situation, there's a greater history than just this immediate thing. So how do we even understand the question of crime in our communities, violence in our community? It permeates every community Africans live in. How do we understand that? I mean, do you agree that there's something wrong with Black people, that somehow we are this primitive force that we've been defined as, that goes into the definition of Africa and African people? Or are you able to see that someone else controls our lives, our economy, our ability to eat, and where we're going to eat, whether we're going to have sleep, whether we're going to have a clean road, a paved road, clean water and stuff like that? People who can manipulate that kind of process locks us in to this situation of permanent misery and violence, by the way. And so the point is that we can help people, our people, understand the reality that's been imposed on us by external forces. That's part of what this political report does. It arms us as African working class, as this advanced detachment, as this vanguard. This is how we understand this reality that we're confronted with wherever we're located. So I want to say that the U.S. power has been the glue that has held the global capitalist system together for almost a century. And with its decline in power and influence, the officials of the entire global system are representative of the uneasy equilibrium we have defined before. This equilibrium, this contest between the past and the future is heating up. And the African People's Socialist Party is leading the masses of the African nation and working class in pursuit of the future of socialist African liberation and unification. This is the future of the victorious proletariat of the world in our glorious march to the classless society known as communism. The generation-long US bloody and hopeless colonial occupation of war against the people of Afghanistan. And I want to say this because, you know, there's this habit in the United States and some other places of talking about the jihadists and all these other people like some evil thing that, you know, has some religious connotation. No, 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 no. Those people, whatever the circumstance, whatever limitations they may have in terms of their worldview, the political education that they don't have, precisely because colonial capitalism dominates our life, dominates us. In Nigeria, you hear of Boko Haram and all these other entities that started off in most instances, somebody just trying to get, make the government do right by us and try to push the white power out of our lives. That's where this stuff starts from. And so people without the benefit that we have right now of this kind of study, this kind of discussion, this kind of political report, this kind of plenary and congresses that we have, which we are growing exponentially among the African people of the world. But without that, you see people striking out on their own. And who do they imitate when they want to find how to get power? They don't imitate the revolutionaries because the revolution has been made invisible by the very same person, groups, structures that control us in Africa and other places, and in the Middle East and other places around the world. They imitate those whom they've seen are in power. They become sometimes mirror images. So if the colonizer cut off your hand to punish you, they learn how to cut off your hand and punish you. They learn this is what is the reflection of what power looks like, without the benefit of an African international understanding that we are providing for the working class, because that's where we are. When we do what we're supposed to do, we are supposed to be among the working class itself. So the generation-long US bloody and hopeless colonial occupation and war against the people of Afghanistan, the reemergence of Russia as a major force in international politics, the emergence of China as the preeminent global power, likely eclipsing the US and the white colonial world, contribute to profound demoralization of a sizable sector of the US and European populations. And when I say demoralization, what you really have to understand is that many of those white people who are climbing the walls at the Capitol in the US, who are upset around the world, have come to identify, have come to understand, have come to live in a world where whiteness defines power and human significance, human identity, civilization, and what have you. And all the white people of the world recognize how civilized they are, how wonderful they are, how beautiful they are, how great they are because of this power, even if they're poor, even if they're going through garbage cans in your alley, trying to pick up aluminum cans and things like that to raise money with. There is this assumption of significance that comes with being white. So you don't even have to say that's what it's coming from, but that's the way it is in the world. They may not have gone to a political education study that's read by QAnon or by the Proud Boys or by Trump or the Republican Party, but that's what the reality is, just like air. You don't have to go to a study to learn how to breathe. You just do it naturally and normally. The only time it becomes a question is when you can't get no more air. And this is what's happening in the world right now. So that this system is denying air. And air is what? Whiteness. And this is the thing that's under assault and in the reality for so many Europeans and Americans. So you can't just understand this only by looking at numbers in terms of profits and losses and things like that, but a whole social system that defines the reality for all of the white people in the world. That's the kind of thing that we are contending with. So we say, combined with the open defiance by much of the world to the continued parasitic relationship the US and Europe have imposed on them, it was almost unbearable to white US colonizers that lowly Iranians, Syrians, Iraqis, Palestinians, along with Venezuelans and peoples from throughout the Americas and Africa would openly flout US white power with impunity. And then here's how the notorious Francis Fukuyama describes the crisis in a December 15, 2020 submission to the Wall Street Journal. Here's Fukuyama, quote, "The American failure to observe the rules and norms of its own democracy has constituted a big blow to democracy worldwide. Russia, which actually does stage rigged elections, sure, has been chortling over Trump's accusation against the American system, while authoritarian rulers around the world have imitated Mr. Trump in dismissing critical media as purveyors of fake news. The COVID epidemic, by accelerating the pre-existing shift in the global economy's center of gravity away from North America and Europe toward Asia, has diminished America's relative weight in geopolitics," unquote. So it should not be necessary to remind our comrades that this is the same Fukuyama who declared the end of history after the Soviet Union collapsed, since in his mind, the US liberal bourgeois system represented the apex of human possibilities. Obviously, he has had to eat his words since that time, and even much of the revealing above quoted Wall Street Journal article includes his undiminished, obscenely obsolete worldview. So the uneasy equilibrium is tipping on the side of the oppressed. Indeed, the second plenary of the 7th Congress of our party is convening at a time of extreme intensive crisis for the colonial capitalist system that has grown to ensnare all the world since Portugal initiated the transatlantic trade in our people. This is the genesis of crisis within the crisis-ridden capitalist system. The following excerpts from the political report to the 2020 plenary still correctly describes the worsened crisis of imperialism that continues to contextualize our revolutionary work. It represents an example of the urgency associated with our plenary theme and the class-based confusion of Fukuyama and other thinking representatives of colonial capitalism. Quote, this is from the 2020 political report. Imperialism, as the 7th Congress was, the imperialism is experiencing obvious disarray. The international bourgeoisie is split in 1,000 different ways. Raging wars and threats of war continue unabated. Traditional bourgeois alliances are under severe stress due to growing competition between parasitic international thieves for shrinking access to the colonial resources. They are fighting over resources violently extracted at the expense of our lives and freedoms and totally necessary for the continued success of the global capitalist system. The economic configuration of the world is undergoing transformation at this very moment. Trade wars in China and the US, the Brexit crisis that has paralyzed England politically and disrupted strategic assumptions of capitalist development in Europe and the world, the growing split between the wealthy North and poor South, threatening the future of Spain, the disruptive emergence of an energized, if economically challenged Russia contesting US hegemony in the Middle East and upsetting the balance of forces in Europe and elsewhere. The audacious China that sometimes aligned with Russia is increasingly willing to openly contend with the US. These are just a few of the examples of imperialism experiencing existential crisis. There are others. Korea, Iran, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, most of the Americas, uninformed and poorly led battles are raging across the African continent. This is complicated by the contest for economic and political advantage between China, the US, and former European colonizers. This is a contest that does not have the advantage of a fully developed, coherent, African internationalist, informed, and organized effort by Africans to conquer power in our own name and in our own interest. The US is the headquarters of a dying imperialism as we have known it for the past 70 years at least. It is the center of the storm, wreaking havoc with imperialist unity internationally in part because of domestic imperialist disunity. A naked battle is going on between the Trump regime and other sectors of the bourgeoisie, sometimes within his own regime. Trump's election failed to resolve the generally nonviolent battle for control of the state, which bourgeois elections are designed to do. This is the context we have characterized as an uneasy equilibrium. The task of our party is to tip the scales of history to the advantage of the oppressed, to the advantage of the future. Our job is to negate the system of colonial capitalism by replacing it with a system of socialism resting on a foundation of a totally liberated and united African continent. Our Africa must be led by the forcibly dispersed African nation under the leadership of the advanced detachment of the African working class, whose very existence has been in preparation for this task. Comrades, this is the context within which we must examine both our readiness and unity to achieve the aims demanded of us at this moment. And that's the end of that quote. This is the context for our African internationalist analysis of the deepening crisis of imperialism unfolding before our eyes, minute by minute. So I'm going to stop there, Comrade Akile.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman. And yeah, we have one question that came in while you were reading and a comment that I wanted to share. And I think this will potentially close us out. Oh, wait, hold on. Okay, there were two. All right, I'm gonna try to, all right, so we might only have time for one, but this question came from, oh, actually, I'll read the comment first. So the comment came from Comrade Farrow in behind enemy lines in South Carolina. And he said, I love the analogy of the undertaker and its relation to the living. That is exactly the relationship between capitalism, colonialism, and us. It lives because we die. Great analogy, Chairman. And then Comrade Sai asks, Uhuru, Chairman, regarding self-determination, could you share your perspective of having our own banks? Do you think we should struggle to have them here and abroad?
Uhuru, thank you, Comrade. Temporarily, we're going to have banks. We're making one now, Comrade Saeed. That's part of what this project we're involved in with the internal bank that we're creating under the leadership of the deputy chair. What is it called? How is it characterized? The many. Anyway, it's a bank that's created to create loans and things like that within our movement. That we've been building on for a while, and this is the beginning of that process. We're going to have a bank even in the process of destroying this relationship we have with colonial white power. So that's being constructed. You're a part of it. Your particular station, wherever you are in terms of what organization you function in, committed within the African People's Socialist Party, has had to make contributions toward this bank. And so this bank is actually under construction. This is something that came out of our 7th Congress, where we laid out that the bank was going to be created, and Comrade Deputy Chair actually initiated a process through which this is occurring. And as I said, right now, the bank is located within the movement, but our objective is to make it a bank that the African people around the world can participate in. It can be an international anti-colonial world bank for African people. So that's being constructed right now, and you're part of that, Uhuru. Comrade Sahi.
Uhuru. Okay, so we might have time to take some other questions then, or just about. Also, someone said solidarity from, I don't know how to pronounce this, Guernsey Channel Islands. I don't know where that is, but Uhuru. Okay, so we have a question that comes in from Comrade Jamila in Louisville, Kentucky, and Jamila asks, do you rock with Dr. Umar Johnson? He's a passionate Pan-African.
Well, we don't rock with Pan-Africanists anywhere that tough, not as Pan-Africanists. And we're not fans of Umar Johnson. And perhaps that would change if we ever saw that university that he's been collecting money for hundreds and thousands of dollars from African people to build. But even if that were the case, the whole struggle we're involved in is not with one individual who we could rock with. We are building a revolutionary movement, and we will win because of organization, not because of any significance of any individual, including this individual that's talking to you now. If I have significance at all, it's because I am a part of a revolutionary project with a revolutionary theory that's attached to a revolutionary organization, an African People's Socialist Party that is led by a particular class in the struggle to overturn our colonial domination. So that's who we are. So it's not a matter of rocking with this individual or that individual. I mean, we're not going to be freed by any individual. And I hope that nobody is misled to believe in that. We love Marcus Garvey, but Garvey was organized. He was the Universal Negro Improvement Association. We love Malcolm X. Malcolm X was organized first as a part of the original Nation of Islam, and then he built his own organization before he was assassinated. So the significance of these forces are people who were in organization, who had theory, who had programs that they were trying to achieve for the liberation of our people, not just to get an institution. I mean, if we were just involved in institutions, we just say, follow somebody because we building the bank that the Sister Saeed just asked about, because we we have furniture stores that we're talking about, but that's not what it's about. Anybody can, I mean, you can set up a furniture store. And by the way, I want to say, as I talk about the banks and furniture stores, the furniture stores are real. You can see, and we had our plenary, we showed it to you, showed how these institutions look in the real world, how the African peoples, the Uhuru bakery and cafe, how it looks, shows you the plans for it, shows you how much money has been galvanized for that, and all the other projects. They're concrete, they're real, and they are part of organization and part of organizational strategy to win our liberation as a people. So that's who we are. And so I'm not telling you not to follow Umar, but I'm telling you that what we're about is not any individual, but organization, strategy, philosophy, Uhuru.
Uhuru. All right, Chairman. So I think that's the last question I'll take. We do have more, but we'll take those into next Sunday. We'll have you review them and take them into next Sunday.
Well, let's do that. But let me, I had initially said that there was a meeting that we usually have following this one that I had sort of dismissed, but I think we should call that meeting following this one. All right?
Mm-hmm. Uhuru. All right. So so before we close out, Chairman, I go to announcements. Do you want to just give us some closing remarks?
Well, I just I feel like we are clearly on the cusp of a great victory, that there's an obvious transformation that's happening in the world. People can see it. People see it in their own lives. People recognize what's happening in the United States, in particular, with the so-called trial of the president, and the fact is there are a lot of armed white people who are running around this country right now, and there are even people who from the security wing of the U.S. colonial capitalist state who are saying that even when pushed underground, that these forces probably are more threatening than they were before, underground, armed, and intent to fight for what they perceive as to be the ongoing control of the world by white power. And we have to take what we're doing quite seriously, because this is a contest with a very fragile, very shaky imperialism, and therefore very dangerous. But our possibilities are great. We must take advantage of it, and I'm hoping that these discussions are helping to show how we can take advantage. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Well, thank you so much again for this study and for presenting this political report to the whole world. And I'm just looking forward to continuing to study it, deepen our understanding, of every single chapter. And I just want to also really salute your leadership and continuing to lay out the blueprint, the trajectory for African people winning our freedom. So We're going to go ahead now and go into our announcements, but I first just want to thank everybody for participating, whether on Facebook or YouTube. Thank you so much for viewing. Thank you for liking and sharing this video. Make sure to, bring in more and more people, every single week. Introduce this video, introduce African internationalism to your friends, your family, to your timelines. So just thank you so much for tuning in. And the study was brought to you by the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, where we're winning the war of ideas. For your revolutionary news and analysis, you can visit theburningspear.com. For revolutionary radio, dynamic shows, and music by Africans all around the world, tune into Black Power 96.3 FM, broadcasting out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and accessible via our app for Apple or Android, or online at blackpower96.org. The theory of African internationalism is a theory of practice. All the energy of the African People's Socialist Party is focused on the destruction of colonial capitalism. Africans of the world, go to our website, apspuhuru.org, and fill out our contact form. That link was dropped into the chat section. So again, apspuhuru.org. Order your copy of Chairman Omali Yeshitela's latest book, Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution, at burningspearmarketplace.com, as well as, all of the other writings by the chairman, and any future writings that the chairman produces will be, published and made available on burningspearmarketplace.com. We are calling on people to follow the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project on Facebook, or visit developmentforafrica.org for important information and helpful tips in regards to the colonial virus COVID-19. APDEP has recently launched a telehealth program, a free resource for African people to get our COVID-19 related questions and concerns answered by licensed doctors and nurses through Project Black Ankh. You can make your free virtual appointment with one of their professional health providers by going to developmentforafrica.org/telehealth. I'm going to kind of squeeze in this announcement, but just make sure that it's on for the remainder of our announcements going forward. But to support the campaigns of two-party candidates in St. Louis, Missouri, for Board of Aldermen, Comrades Herdoja Kalambai Bentham for Ward 3, and Comrade Tachara Masemba for Ward 21 in St. Louis, running on Revolutionary Times, Revolutionary Solutions, and Black is Back, respectively, putting forward campaigns of reparations, Black community control of the police, economic development versus police containment, to revitalize the North Side African working class community in St. Louis. To support those candidates and those campaigns, go to votekalambai.org or votemasimba.org. Donate, volunteer your time, no matter where you're located on the earth. These elections have serious implications for the whole African nation. So wherever you are, make sure that you are putting all of your support behind your candidates, Herdoja Kalambai Bentham and Tachara Masemba. Again, votekalambai.org and votemasimba.org. Donate, 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 and make sure to sign up to volunteer with these campaigns. Share these campaigns with your friends, your families, on every platform that you have. Push these candidates, because they are shaking up the status quo. They are, they're ripping it up in St. Louis, Missouri. So support those candidates. And if you're looking for more opportunities for live political education from Chairman Omali Yeshitela, tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Chairman Omali Yeshitela's Facebook like page and the Burning Spear TV YouTube page, with Chairman's address to the African nation, discussing important topical issues and providing us with an African internationalist analysis. And lastly, to keep up with our movement events, visit theburningspear.com's events page and subscribe to our mailing list. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study.